You want me to name my children what? That's what we're talking about today as we continue our sermon series called Triple H. It's this stewardship sermon series where we're looking at the discipleship process. And we think that discipleship process comes from the calling of Jesus to his disciples. That's a calling that still comes to us today, but it's a calling of our head, heart, and our hands. When we see this acting out when Jesus called Peter, when he said, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." And so follow me and I will make you, our hearts, fishers of men. That's what we're doing. And we're seeing that as a faithful disciple, that the disciples steward the things that God gives them well. So we're really connecting this idea of following Jesus, being a disciple of his, and seeing how we can steward with the things that the Lord has given us all the better. And since today we're talking about our hearts, I think one of the most heart-wrenching stories in the Bible is the one about Hosea. And if you're not familiar with Hosea, it's a book of the Bible, and this story is fascinating because Hosea was called to be a prophet for God, and he had a very specific, interesting, funny, and tragic kind of like classic comedy kind of idea behind his story, right? So what was going on? Israel, the people of God, were just going away from God, going after all these other gods from all the other lands around them and just going after them. And God wanted Hosea's life to be a picture of how God was feeling about this. So we're going to read about this, what God asked Hosea to do. It's found in Hosea chapter 1, verse 2, right? And so the Lord speaks to Hosea here, and he says, "Go take yourself a wife of those are fun words. So we got all the kids out, right? All right, well, it's in the Bible, so it must be okay, right? Yeah. Well, here we go. Take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." Basically what's going on is Hosea marries a prostitute named Gomer. And the Lord tells him to have 3 children here with Gomer, this prostitute. And this is what the Lord says to name the children. Verse 4 of that chapter 1 is where you first see this. And the Lord said, "Call the first one's name Jezreel." And you can read more about that. It kind of goes into it more. But basically Jezreel means like to sow or to scatter, kind of how the people are scattered in the time of the Babylonian captivity. Remember that? Like over there. Then we look and see the second child. It's a girl this time, and she conceived again and bore a daughter. And the Lord said to him, "Call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them all." Can you imagine naming your daughter No Mercy? Like this is ridiculous. This is heart-wrenching, right? But there's a third kid, and the third kid is verse 9. And the Lord said, "Call his name Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God." Oh my goodness. Like it's heart-wrenching, right? It's almost funny how on the nose it is, right? The Jezreel means that people are scattered. They're not together anymore. They're not the family of God anymore. No mercy, saying that God is not going to show mercy on you. And not my people. Oh my goodness, it's just ridiculous. I can imagine this playing out today, where if my sister had like another child, and I call my sister as she's about to give birth to a child, and it's like, "Listen, I heard it by good authority from the Lord that you should name your child Mama Doesn't Love You," right? Just name that child Mama Doesn't Love You, right? You can actually love the child and all that stuff, but that child's name is Mama Doesn't Love You, right? It would tear my sister's heart apart to name her child that, right? It would really affect the story. And that's what we see in Hosea. We see that he's like emulating the broken heart of God. So if Hosea was your friend, how would you encourage him during this time? We're doing a stewardship sermon series right now, and our gospel lesson today was that very stewardshipy verse, one that we talk about a lot. It's one of my personal favorites. But can you just bring it out and just talk to Hosea about it? Can you just bring that thing out? It's like, ooh, here's the words of the Jesus, and we like pull the pin like a grenade and just throw it at Hosea. We're like, Hosea, I've got all your problems we can solve right now. Jesus says, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. And Jose's like, thanks. Like, I think I got this. No, hear me out. Listen to what Jesus says. Like, look at the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. God takes care of them. He'll take care of you too, Hosea. Don't worry, Hosea. I know God told you to marry that woman, but but you wanted to be a big time prophet. Remember that? And you've made some mistakes too. You probably deserve some of this, but don't worry. God, Jesus tells you not to worry. Remember, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You know, you can't serve God and money at the same time. How do you think Hosea would receive all those messages? I don't think he would have received them well. Like we may have the best of intentions and try to give Hosea something that's like trying to give him like some cooling gospel, but I have a feeling all those phrases, when it hits his ears, hits his soul, hit his already hurt heart, that it's like the fire of the law that is inhabiting his body. Because I know in my own life, when I've had those situations where I've just been stressed out beyond belief, when I've had those situations that just were out of my control and my anxiety level was up, but I just didn't know what the next little bit was going to look like. That when someone came up to me and just said, don't worry, just trust God, it just didn't seem to help. And that phrase of just trusting God, then it seems like it's more to be anxious about, more to worry about. It's like, oh, now I'm not trusting God enough. Oh my goodness. Like now I feel overwhelmed about that as well. And I think in these times, we take these words that are meant to be cooling gospel, and we end up haphazardly kind of misusing them. You know, and we end up kind of haphazardly saying stuff like, you better shape up. Remember, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You know, so just stop worrying. But the question today, is that what Jesus really means here in Matthew chapter 6? I don't think that's what Jesus was talking about at all. In fact, to look at this whole section of Matthew chapter 6, like the whole section, it kind of includes 5, 6, and 7, the chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It includes the Jesus' teachings on the Beatitude, like blessed are the poor in spirit, and it includes all this other teaching stuff we know, where Jesus is condemning murder. He says, don't disfigure yourself when you're fasting. All this stuff about worrying. There's a bunch of stuff that we have lots and lots of sermon material on there, and you kind of look at it, it's just all these things in this Sermon on the Mount that it's talking about. But what I think is interesting about that Sermon on the Mount and how the Gospel of Matthew is constructed and how it works as literature, that it's almost like the Sermon on the Mount is acting like a table of contents for what's happening later in the Gospel, right? And you can kind of see it playing out. It's not a one-to-one transfer, but it's almost like, hey, we're delivering these ideas at the beginning, and then we're going to play out these ideas and what they look like later. You see this in stories like the faith of the centurion. And the one we're talking about today is actually the call of Matthew. Remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the call of Peter, right? And Peter is just by that boat on the shore. Peter may not be the smartest guy, but he just dropped his nets and followed after Jesus when Jesus said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Remember, we're on the make you right now, right? And Jesus today, he goes up to Matthew, right? So let's look at the call of Matthew, because you'll see some things that are similar. So Matthew 9, verse 9. Jesus passed on from there, and he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And he rose up and followed him. Again, with the following stuff, like these people just follow. It's amazing, right? But there was a detail there. Did you catch it? Like it was the tax booth. The tax booth. Now, what's going on with the tax booth? And this is where you begin to see the story of Matthew play out. Because you realize here that Matthew is like that last son of Hosea that was named not my people, that Matthew is not my people. And that Matthew probably has had no mercy given to him in his life at all. He was just a dirty sinner. Because a tax collector, what a tax collector was basically someone would just be like, oh, I'm done. I'm going to work for the enemy now. I'm going to work for this insurgent force that has taken my people captive, right? That's how they viewed the Romans back then. I'm going to take them and I'm going to collect money for them, right? He's selling out his own people, so for a job. He's working for the enemy. You know, as we talk about Hosea and the heartache that he felt, it makes me think about Matthew. Like what happened in his life to be affected and hit by that heartache? That he felt like he had no other options than to go make money, raising taxes, taxing his own people for the enemy. You know? It makes sense. Like the righteous in that day, the Pharisees and the people in the synagogue and perhaps his own family have had no mercy on them. All they've hoped is to scatter him around. They just want to be done with him. Like, you're not one of us now. You are not our people anymore. How many times was he told that? And think about the people that he's hanging out with. Do you think like the good Jewish boys and girls are hanging out with Matthew on a Sunday evening, you know, after Sabbath? No, not at all. Like, they've all probably sent him away. Like, who is he hanging out with? He's hanging out with all the ruffians. He's hanging out with the other tax collectors, the other sinners, the other people who have been declared to be not my people. And immediately Matthew invites Jesus over for dinner with all of his friends. And who are Matthew's friends again? All of these outsiders, right? All these not my peoples. All these people, these other tax collectors and sinners and all these people who the Pharisees have always looked down on. And I love to picture what this dinner probably looked like, because it could go one of two ways, I think. Like, you have like Jesus goes and he's like, well, I'll come over, but I'm only going to come over because I'm Jesus, right? And I have to be nice to you. But Jesus sits in the corner and just like passive aggressively judges everybody at the table. It's like, you guys are all terrible and all those things, right? But we know that's not what it was. The other way is that just this riotous laughing constantly, right? Like constantly toasting to things, maybe having a little bit more wine than they should have that night, and just having a good time. And you can tell that they were having a fun, good time together. The disciples and all those sinners and tax collectors, all of Matthew's friends there, because the righteous people have a fit about it. If Jesus wasn't enjoying himself, they wouldn't have had a fit about it. Jesus had a fun time with these people. And this is what the righteous say. These Pharisees say to all these people that are not my people, right? Like, you need to be hanging out with the good people, Jesus. And it says this in verse 11. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? I love this because this is still such an issue to this day. You need to be careful about the company you keep, you know? Like, you need to be careful about all this. I mean, we still have this whole thing about communion in this, right? Like, it's like, oh, we got to make sure we're in full agreement with everyone in order to have communion with them. You know, how dare you hang out with not my people? Don't you know that we have not shown them mercy? Don't you know that we have scattered them all over the place? Don't you know that that's how we've treated these people so that they know they're bad? Why are you cutting up and having a fun time with them, Jesus? Don't you know that we are punishing them? And I love what Jesus says after that. He's like, the sick need a physician. And then he says this in verse 13. And he says this, and remember what we've been talking about with Hosea's children, with no mercy and not my people and scattered. Jesus says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. I desire mercy. For all these people that have never been shown mercy before, all these people that the righteous have always kicked to the side, all these people who have been scattered in their lives and told that they are not good enough and not, Jesus is sitting, eating dinner with all of them, calling one of them to be his disciple. And he's probably laughing and cutting up and maybe having just a little bit too much wine. And I think in this moment, you can see that Matthew can probably take all those anxieties about everything that's happened in his life up until that point, and he's finally able to breathe. That the anxiety may come off of him a little bit there. That the worries just fell off of him, and maybe we get to see his heart change right there in front of everybody. And that's the God that cares for not my people. That's the God that cares for you. We see this story about Matthew the tax collector in that sermon of Jesus, that Sermon on the Mount. We hear those tender words of Jesus all through that story when he says things like, don't be anxious. Look at the flowers of the field that God clothes so beautifully in the field today, and tomorrow is just cut and ripped out and thrown into the fire tomorrow. How much more does God care after you? That Jesus sitting in the middle of that group of people with Matthew and his friends laughing and cutting up and having a good time is the embodiment of that story, because all those people were those tender shoots, those flowers of the field that the righteous and the Pharisees and the world had all tried to cut them out and tried to throw them into the fire, and Jesus was giving them beauty and grace. Right? He was clothing them in beauty and grace and having a wonderful evening of love and acceptance and being there. And this story that Matthew wrote down, this gospel of Jesus, this good news of Jesus, is just story after story after story of Jesus doing this with person after person after person. That these people that have been cut down and scattered for whatever reason, that Jesus is bringing beauty back to them. And this story of all of this continues on to the most crescendoing act of love, that when Jesus himself allows himself to be cut down and thrown into the fire when he goes on the cross and dies, so that others like Matthew and Matthew's friends, who are not my people, who have been shown no mercy, who have been tried to be scattered by all around, so that they might be saved. Jesus goes all the way to the cross so that even in our darkest times, when we feel like outsiders, all the way to our good times, where he becomes that grass of the field that is cut down so that we may be with him. But before all the tax collectors and the crosses, before all the stories of Matthew's and the sermons of Jesus, we have to go back to that prophet Hosea and the mess that he's in, the mess where he's listening to God and marrying this promiscuous woman and naming his children not my people and scattered and no mercy. But God still comes to him, just like Jesus came to Matthew in that time. And you see this in Hosea chapter 2, verse 23, when God says, and I will have mercy on no mercy. And I will say to not my people, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. Hearts that are transformed. God, in the midst of that mess of Hosea's life, I kind of picture him like Jesus, sitting around laughing and carrying on around a table, holding on to them and saying that you are the one that I will have mercy on. And you and your name and what you have done and your past and all those things, they will not define you. You will be the ones that I have mercy and that I show love. And to wrap up another storyline, Matthew, that tax collector, that's the author of that gospel, Matthew. And I've talked about it some, but the amazing thing about that gospel is that the singular idea that is in it is that Matthew is about Emmanuel, which means God with us. And Matthew, that tax collector who had been thrown away and scattered and shown mercy, he took in his life as a disciple, as someone who wanted to steward the stories that he had been given and everything that God had been given to him, to encourage me and encourage you to go out and trust in God that he will have you and always be with you. He wrote his book, and the singular idea and this line that stretches all the way through it is one that God is with you, that he is Emmanuel. And so I hope that we would, when called by Jesus like Matthew, follow me and I will make you fishers of men, that we, like Matthew, could stand up and follow him and steward the things of the kingdom that we've been given to the best of our ability. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. You guys have a great week.